All right, I have a special guest, someone that's been on multiple times with breaking news stories. Today, we're going to be going through some of the biggest stories in the news. To help me do that, I have Charlie Spearing. Charlie, thank you so much for joining me again.
Hi, Stephen. It's good to be back.
All right, so just some background. Charlie is a journalist with the Daily Mail. He's broken several big stories on Kamala Harris, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, and also on President Biden. He's also an author. He authored a book by the name of Amateur Hour, Kamala Harris in the White House. Charlie, yesterday, Donald Trump and others spoke to a sold-out crowd in Madison Square Garden. 20,000 people inside the arena. It's believed another 80,000 outside of the arena. Republicans found this to be extremely patriotic and inspiring. However, MSNBC and now Democrats are just on this like rampage of comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. They said that this is the beginning of his madness. He will use the military to attack the American people. They flashed image after image of Nazis marching, saluting, rallying. Why does MSNBC feel a need to sink to this low level of journalism?
Well, you'd have to ask MSNBC, but it's pretty clear already where they're coming from. They're terrified that Trump could become the president of the United States again, and they really have run out of ways to sort of prop up Kamala Harris and put her back up on a pedestal when she's proven time and time again that, she's not very good at doing interviews. She's struggling to get her message out. That's why you have this last minute panic from the media elite to sort of, try to get to just completely destroy Trump in the minds of, common sense conservative voters, right? The conservatives that are watching MSNBC are sort of the more professional conservatives who are looking for, who are reading from the news on both sides of the aisle and trying to make up their mind about who they're going to vote for. I suspect that there's a lot of them who already, might be willing to support President Trump, but just in case there's anybody on the fence, MSNBC wants to make clear that this is a time to be very afraid. If you vote for Trump, you are literally Hitler is really the last argument that they're making right now. And it's for those of us who were around in 2016, when the coverage that they gave Trump back when he wasn't even a threat. He wasn't considered a threat to Hillary Clinton, but they still treated him this way and just trying to smear him as a Nazi at every step.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it seems like whenever you've run out of something to say, you call someone a Nazi, and this seems to be what they're leading with, which tells you they are indeed running out of time and running out of, I guess, names to call him. However, it was received as very patriotic. Many of the speeches I felt were full of good information. Do you think that this inflammatory rhetoric is helpful to Kamala Harris? Is it even helpful to MSNBC? Is this the kind of echo chamber information that their listeners want to hear?
No, it's really surprising to see. And if it was Kamala Harris, she's run on this idea that we're going to turn the page on this divisive way of campaigning, and we're going to turn the page on Donald Trump, and we're going to move forward in a bipartisan way to find common ground in the future. Those are just talking points. Those are just words. Everything that she's demonstrated is that, yes, she wants to talk about Donald Trump in terms of being a Nazi, racist, fascist. And that's her number one goal in the closing days of her campaign. And certainly the media is taking a very similar track. Well, let's just talk about, this German dictator from 1942 and just try to smear Republicans as much as we can. And there was a couple of fun memes that went out too. It's just like, look at all the other Republicans running for president that they smeared as, a fascist or a Nazi. And then, it's all of them, right? This is a common talking point. I think most people see it for what it is.
Yeah. How come when Bill Clinton held a rally at Madison Square Garden, he was not referred to as Hitler? They didn't, flash back to Hitler coming and giving a speech. When Jimmy Carter received the nomination at Madison Square Garden, again, nothing. Are you saying that it has nothing to do with the location? This is just a uniquely Democrat talking point to try to humiliate or shame or defame Republican candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. Look at, Donald Trump's from New York. He helped make the skyline of New York. He loves New York. This is part of who Donald Trump is. So it's no surprise he wants to be at Madison Square Garden, the site of all the major sporting events. And, all of the fights, the biggest fights are at Madison Square Garden. If you can pack and sell out Madison Square Garden, you're considered a peak New York individual, a peak New York of, and so many Republicans were like, why are you going to New York to do this? Because New York's not going to vote for you for president. But it really demonstrates what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to demonstrate this cultural moment. I'm from New York. I'm back in New York, despite of everything they tried to do to me. And I'm going to keep fighting to go forward. And I'm going to, I'm going to have all these guests on stage who are, interested in what I'm talking about or on my side, and I'm going to put them up on the stage no matter what they say. I'm not going to censor them. I'm not going to control them. I'm going to try to create a fun, free-loving rally that actually inspires people rather than just try to button it all up neat and tidily.
Okay. So you recently did an article over on the Daily Mail where you wrote about Jerry Wartsky. He's a 94-year-old Jewish man. Sadly, his family was captured by Hitler and the Germans in Poland. He was 8 or 9 years old. His entire family was killed by the Nazis and Hitler. He says he finds it incredibly insulting to compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, since he lived under both, and Trump had a 4-year track record of not being against Israel, not being against Jewish people. What were your thoughts as you wrote that article about Jerry and his experience? And as you've covered Donald Trump, do you see him as a raging anti-Semite?
Yeah, it's interesting to, when you have that moment of somebody who is actually at Auschwitz, who rolls up his sleeve to show the tattoo. Sure, it was a Trump campaign video, but it was a very powerful testimony from someone whose credibility on the issue is impeachable, right? He has the right to choose and endorse whoever he wants. And then when you see that, and when you see Trump praying with the Jews to recognize the first anniversary of the October 7th terrorist attacks, you can definitely see there's no anti-Semitism there, and that he actually cares a great deal about the Jewish people. He has Jewish people in his family. So I think that the common anti-Semite trope is kind of running thin. And certainly, we know that just by polls of American Jews that they typically prefer Democratic candidates. In this case, they typically prefer Kamala Harris. But there is a big portion of conservative Jews who like what Trump has done. His record on Israel was unimpeachable. He had a really good record, better than most past Republican presidents. He did things that they would have never considered. So there is a very passionate minority of Jews who support the president, the former president, and I think that they should be heard and their stories should be told.
Yeah. I saw over on Twitter, there was a video outside of Madison Square Garden. There was a large gathering of Jewish men. They had on their yarmulkes, their prayer shawls. And it basically said, worst Nazi rally ever. Like, who gathers a whole group of, Jewish men to a Nazi rally. So obviously, this is just a talking point that, as you mentioned, is wearing thin. Why, in your opinion, do you think the Democrat Party sees MAGA and Trump as such a threat? Is he just the next domino they have to knock down, or is he and his voter base a genuine threat to their existence or the country?
Well, yeah, certainly if Donald Trump brings in a record number of Hispanics, a record number of Black Americans who choose to support him. Now, granted, it'll probably still be in the majorities who favor Democrats, but enough people in other places, if he can get different votes in blue states, right? If he can kind of sort of collect this this widespread coalition to show that it's a widespread coalition, and that Democrats are actually losing their grip on these important minority groups that they've relied on to win elections. I think that spells doom for the Democratic Party. That's why Kamala Harris is out there doing as many interviews with black media as she can, reminding them on everything she can, painting Trump as this racist who will not help them, and painting her as sort of the champion of the Black American community, African American community. I think that that's a big part of what her and her campaign are trying to do, just as they've tried to do with every single Republican, right? Not only, are you going to call them Hitler, but you're also going to, try to force this image of racism on them, and so that people see them as the racist, out of touch Republicans, and so it's not an unusual tactic, but we certainly see it played up even more when it's Donald Trump.
Okay. Hey, I want to share something cool about the upcoming election. Do you think you can predict the outcome of the presidential election, or maybe how many seats Democrats or Republicans will win in Congress? Now there's a legal way to back those predictions with a platform named Kalshi. Kalshi is the first legally approved exchange where you can bet on events, including the election. For the first time in over 100 years, Kalshi won court approval to allow betting on U.S. elections. You can wager on who will win the presidency, control the House or Senate, or take a key swing state. It's already trusted by hundreds of thousands of users with over $1 billion worth of trades completed. Here's an example. Right now, the odds are about 50-50 between Trump and Kamala. If you bet on one and they win, you'll double your money. Pretty sweet deal, right? If you feel confident, now's your chance. Head over to Kalshi using my link, kalshi.com/Gardner. The first 500 traders who deposit $100 will get a free $20 credit. All right, I'm going to leave that link down below. You literally wrote the book on Kamala Harris, right? Amateur Hour. The first time I had you on, you let people know, hey,
that's right.
someone who could rise within the White House. I think we need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right.
With everything that you know about Vice President Kamala Harris and her past, in her run for president of the United States, has she performed better, worse, or as expected based on everything you learned about her?
Yeah, Stephen, there's definitely a rise and a flow in this final campaign of hers, right? Because if she doesn't win this campaign, it's highly unlikely she'll run for elected office again, unless she tries to run for something in California. But yeah, just reliving the 2020 election, how that cratered so badly. And a lot of it just came from her struggling to find an authentic voice, struggling to get beyond sort of the finding policy positions that she actually believed in and getting her to talk about them in ways that reflected the concerns of voters, and voters were able to engage with. When voters on the ground in Iowa saw what Kamala Harris had to offer, despite all of her support from the elite media, from the donors, from sort of the elite members of the party, she had a leg up on a lot of her competitors. But as soon as voters kind of saw who she was and what she was about, they weren't that impressed. And so they sort of moved on to other candidates. That's kind of what we're seeing now. And even though Kamala Harris was a bit more scripted in the beginning, she's kind of tried to loosen up a little bit and engage the media a little more, do some more media, hoping that she can get out there and sort of move the needle back in her direction. But I see a lot of the same scripted lines in a lot of these interviews, a lot of the same platitudes that we've been watching for years. And even when she's not scripted, she's sort of unhesitant and unsure of herself, which, during the CNN town hall with Anderson Cooper, that was one of the where Cooper asks her some pretty direct questions that should be a simple answer from anybody running for office. And you could see that visibly that she was struggling to answer the questions in very clear that she was very uncertain about herself.
Yeah. She said a couple of things in the last week. She said, I may not be the best at giving answers because I prefer to research before I say anything. Well, there's not a lot of time when you're president of the United States to sit down and research something for hours. You need to be informed and knowledgeable, but beforehand, and surround yourself with good people. The other thing that I thought was interesting, Frank Luntz, the pollster, he pointed out that this may come back to bite Kamala in the butt, but in the last couple of days, she started telling people, don't vote for me, vote against Donald Trump. Like, what kind of a losing message do you have when you're like, listen, I know you don't like me. I'm not articulate. I haven't given you any reason to believe your life will be safer or more affordable or will avoid World War III. But just vote against Donald Trump, if nothing else. I mean, what are your thoughts on her saying, I need to research every answer and don't vote for me, but vote against Donald Trump?
Right, coming up with this excuse for not having ready answers to many questions. And this is the common struggle of people who have been watching Kamala Harris for so long. It's like, how many times is she going to be asked these questions with no answer? And this is why so much of her staff in Washington left her office, because they would prepare her for these media interviews and they would hand her these important binders and rehearse talking points and do media training with her. But when the cameras turned on, she would panic and just offer some other word salad or like the moment of, I haven't been to Europe either. I don't know what, that famous moment when they ask her about the border. These are the kind of incidents that they'd run into and just end up realizing that it was time for them to go, because she would turn around and then blame them for her lack of preparation, but she hadn't done the work. So that's a very big feature of Kamala Harris, which isn't going to get any better if she's elected president. It'll only get worse. And then, as you mentioned, the other thing is just like, so many Republicans, so many Democrats really struggle on this issue, and it's going to be tough for her to keep going. Yeah,
I agree. Okay, over on the Daily Mail, this isn't an article that you wrote, but you guys have Christoph Barad, who is an economist, securities expert. Bloomberg News listed him as the best economist for predicting the U.S. economy for the last 11 of 12 years. He is saying, according to your article, as he reads the polls, the news, as he's seeing how Wall Street is rearranging, that he is saying he believes this is all leading towards a Donald Trump win. Any thoughts on that? Can you, through the polls, the trend and momentum, how the stock market is behaving, do you think that those are indicators of where the American people's head's at when it comes to voting?
Yeah, I think so. Republicans are obviously being very cautious, but continuing to fight as much as they can. But yeah, all the trends show that, the most important issue is the economy. And then the person they trust the most to work on the economy is still Donald Trump, despite everything Kamala Harris has done to sort of write an agenda and campaign on this idea of an opportunity economy, something that was completely separate from the Biden administration, and trying to get that plane off the ground as she heads to the polls. I think that's probably a mistake, and she hasn't done the work to sell the idea. She has the scripted talking points and she has the individual proposals. Let's give money. Let's give $8,000 tax credit to a new family. Let's give a big tax credit for people buying a new house. Let's give a huge tax credit for people starting a new business. But if for voters who already have a first child, who already have a first house, who are struggling already to keep their business open, that doesn't necessarily offer them a plan that they can focus on and say, well, yeah, I can see how this helps me, and I'm going to choose that to move forward. So her messaging on the economy is a struggle. And, she spends a lot of time talking about raising taxes. That's not necessarily what, business people want to hear. But and her economic message, and ultimately kind of settles down to this, and you see her kind of making these talking points, is, X amount of economists said my economy or my economic plan would actually do much better than Donald Trump's plan. That's kind of where she ends up. It's like, well, it doesn't necessarily work. You have to be able to talk passionately about the issues in order to get voters to believe in your agenda.
Yeah. I think Don Lemon, of all people, may have had the winning formula for Kamala Harris. He went to several major swing cities and swing states and was shocked how many people like Donald Trump. And he said his two biggest takeaways were that people said, I don't know who Kamala Harris is, And I feel like financially I was better off under Donald Trump. And he said, for those two reasons, I worry that she might lose. And as I've watched her over and over again, I've just seen, even though I'm not a big fan of Don Lemon, I think he might have been spot on. I think people are like, I don't know who she is. I don't know what she stands for. I don't know how my life gets better. And then they think back on the nostalgic years of the Trump administration and they go, wow, gas was affordable, eggs were affordable, eating out was doable, an apartment was affordable, a mortgage was within reach. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Don Lemon's two points of data that he was trying to share with Kamala Harris?
Yeah, it is interesting when you have somebody who's traditionally, a journalist from CNN going into these towns and actually interviewing people. It's something CNN struggles to do that just, hey, let's talk to voters and figure out what's going on instead of talk to all the party leaders to, lie to us. I think that it's an interesting exercise and it's a very unique opportunity, right? Because people remember 4 years of Trump and they remember 4 years of Biden. And if they see Kamala Harris as part of that, as part of the 4 years under Biden, then she's got a lot of trouble heading into the election because it's just such a rare opportunity for voters to have such a clear example of how things were before, how things were after, and where they want to go in the future.
Yeah. Daily Mail covered this one pretty heavily. Kamala Harris holds a big rally down in Houston, Texas. There's lines, almost looks like a Trump rally. This thing is just like filling up. And then everyone starts to realize this free concert from Beyonce is not happening. There is no concert. She's literally there just to talk about abortion and signal support for Kamala Harris. Why would Kamala Harris and her team and the mainstream media use clever wording and language to make people believe there was going to be a free Beyonce concert, knowing that at some point the gig is up? She's not going to sing. She's not going to put on a free concert. Any thoughts on that? I just thought that was so stupid.
It's very unusual, right? And it shows that the team wasn't having a conversation with Beyonce to see just exactly what her role is. And then, I honestly think it's just bad advanced staffing work, unless they were that stupid that they could trick their voters again. Because as you remember, they teased this idea that Beyonce was going to come to the Democratic National Convention and perform, and really fired up a lot of people to tune in and watch Kamala Harris's remarks. That didn't happen. Turns out it was never going to happen, and it was a false rumor. But then you go forward with another false rumor. That's not good for you and your supporters, and not good for Beyonce and her fans, certainly.
Yeah. Some of the language, I went back and looked at some of the articles and headlines, and they were using deceptive language like live appearance from music superstar Beyonce coming live, music star Beyonce live appearance. Like all the language was like leading you to believe, hey, this is going to be a free concert. She's live. She's making an appearance. She's a music star. So I just think, wow, that was really bad messaging. I know a lot of people left there pretty upset. Will that switch their vote? Maybe not. But I just thought, wow, at some point people are going to realize there is no free concert, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to Hillary, and I think there was a lot of musical performances, and it happened in Detroit with Eminem, even this year, in Detroit with Obama and Eminem. Eminem didn't sing, but Obama felt the need to grab the mic and start rapping some of Eminem's lyrics.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. If I remember correctly, there were a lot more concerts in 2016 that they actually had the celebrity without the presidential candidate, giving a performance, and then maybe, the presidential candidate rolling in at the end. It's a common Democratic playbook. It's very interesting to see them rely on this sort of old tactic, bring out as many celebrities as you can at the end to try to, pump up the vote, pump up the excitement among the young people to get them to go to the polls. And I wonder if that's still effective. It certainly didn't help Hillary in 2016, and it very well might not help, Kamala Harris here in 2024.
Yeah. I remember even Biden, they got Cardi B, and a few other, rappers to do shows with him. Now those people, they don't support him. They were shamed for saying, "Hey, my family's groceries are too expensive." Well, she's dead to us. Never bring her on again. My cousin, his testicles swole up after getting the COVID shot. No, never bring her on again. It was like they were dropping these people that weren't supporting their narrative. I don't know that the results would be the same or anywhere near the same. They could actually even be better, though I doubt it. As of right now, just over on YouTube, the Joe Rogan, Donald J. Trump interview is just surpassed 34 million views. Over on Spotify, I have to imagine it's double or triple that. This was a huge success for Joe Rogan as well as the former president. Do you think Kamala Harris should go on Joe Rogan? I know there's a lot of pressure for her to go on. I don't know. Someone that gives on average a 7-minute speech trying to do a 3-hour interview. What are your thoughts on her going on Joe Rogan?
Yeah, I think it would be a net positive. I think that, if she had a conversation with Joe Rogan about anything he was interested in, and he made it very clear when he was interviewing Trump, like, this is a conversation. I'm not going to interrupt your thoughts. I'm not going to press you on the issues. I'm just going to have a conversation with you about things I care about and things you care about. And I think it's a very, very strong formula, and any candidate should feel confident putting their candidate through that, even though Joe Rogan isn't necessarily and his audience are not super Kamala Harris supporters. These are the people you need to convince that you're a real human, you're a real human person. You can empathize and talk normally about normal issues and not just speaking talking points. And you can answer moderately interesting questions, not even tough questions, as we saw with the interview with Joe Rogan and Donald Trump. So I think it is a net benefit. The only problem is, and this is what they're concerned about, is that at some point in the 3 hours where there'll be moments of where Kamala Harris seems uncertain or unable to answer one of the questions, that'll go viral and make her look bad. And I think that the ultimate calculus is they're trying to avoid those moments and really just trying to find more friendly podcast audiences. Certainly we saw with Charlemagne, he was helping her along with helpful questions. Charlemagne, the God of the Breakfast Club. I just watched one with Shannon Sharp on his podcast, pretty friendly, pretty basic questions. And a lot of the same, her reciting a lot of the same talking points in response to the questions. Interestingly enough, an operative I follow in Texas mentioned that Kamala Harris was set up to do the interview, but they couldn't agree on Joe Rogan not being able to ask certain questions. I think that's one of Rogan's preconditions. It's like, no, I don't, there are no preconditions from this interview. I will ask you whatever I want. And so I think ultimately Kamala's team might have been a little afraid of being unable to control some of the questions in that interview.
Interesting. Yeah. I can't imagine that he would agree to being limited. I'm sure. Right. I'm sure
that hurts your audience. That's always a bad look.
Exactly. And I'm sure, like, one of them, don't ask the vice president about when she knew that Joe Biden was having memory issues or dementia related mental difficulties. That's a question that she wants to avoid. She's demanded that question not be asked in other interviews. So I have to imagine things like that. Things that might tie her to the negative parts of the Biden administration. She would not want to be tied to those. Someone she is tied to that maybe you did some research on when looking up all of your details for Amateur Hour is her sister Maya. I read that she was overheard calling her sister incompetent, that she has asked her to not join her on the campaign trail, that she sees her as a net negative, that she might actually say something that Kamala would be embarrassed about or maybe be questioned about her past. I don't know. What are your thoughts on her asking her sister Maya, hey, distance yourself from my campaign, please?
Well, it's very clear. A big part of her 2019 campaign is she had her sister as a chairwoman of her campaign, and it became this very interesting power struggle. Kamala Harris was supposed to be leading the campaign, but her sister Maya is the campaign chair, so they can't have the tough conversations that they need to have about how to be more disciplined and be better prepared for interviews and questions and talking points and policies and ideas, and even campaign strategy. Meanwhile, the campaign manager is too afraid to cross Maya Harris, making the sort of campaign, everybody's sort of in charge, but nobody's in charge, and certainly not Kamala Harris. Ultimately, it's up to the candidate. If you want to run to control the country, you have to prove that you can run a campaign, and you can tell your campaign advisors, no, I'm going to do this and not this. And we saw her do so many different reboots on so many different issues, even in that failed campaign. I think that a lot of people ultimately blamed Maya for that. Ultimately Kamala Harris is to blame, but Maya being on the campaign, the family, the close relationship made it very difficult for, professionals to operate in that campaign. Interestingly enough, one person I talked to who was familiar with the extended family dynamic seemed to think that they blamed Maya Harris for the problem. She is a former ACLU activist in California and was a huge part of the sort of the social justice messaging on the Hillary Clinton campaign. And so there was very much this the reason Kamala Harris went so far left in 2019, a big part of it was that Maya Harris was on her campaign chair, kind of cheering her on to shift her position on a whole host of issues.
Yeah. Do you mentioned if Kamala loses, that she will probably not run again in the future. Maybe, I don't know, she might go for governor of California or something, retreat back to where she had some credibility, maybe some popularity, maybe some love. Do you think Democrats at this point regret running her and not having a accelerated primary after Joe Biden decided to drop out of the race?
Yeah, if she loses, it's going to be a big civil war in the Democratic Party, right? There were so many forces at work. There were so many hurt Biden people who felt that he could have clawed his way back. There's so many people who supported Harris and wanted her to succeed despite not having evidence of her succeeding, that if they had just looked at past campaigns, they could have pretty much come up to the conclusion that this campaign would be run in a similar direction. So I do think it'll be a very ugly period of reckoning for the Democratic Party, but I think ultimately Kamala Harris will sort of move on out of national politics and just be content being the historic first, Black woman vice president. And then, like you said, there's been rumors that if she returns to California, maybe she'll want to run for governor to replace Gavin Newsom. And maybe Gavin Newsom gives a shot at the presidency. We'll see how it all shakes out.
Yeah. Yep. Only time will tell. Okay. Tell us in our final minutes, tell us a little bit about Amateur Hour, your book. And then I'm going to put a link to it down below, as well as to your Twitter and your Daily Mail articles.
Yeah, I first kicked this off in 2023 and spent a year writing it, and we published it in January to just basically talk about who Kamala Harris is, where she come from. A lot of people are familiar with sort of the awkward word salads and how she's gone viral for those reasons, but it's important, and I argued at the time in January when I spoke with you that it's important to know who she is and where she came from, because we need to know, because there's a very real possibility she could be the 47th president of the United States. And it certainly, that was a bit of a surprise in June when Joe Biden did ultimately drop out and shocking everybody and putting Kamala Harris back on the pedestal too. So if you read the book, it's a pretty easy read, pretty short read. If you want to pop over and read it before the election, it's definitely, I wrote it with the feeling that, with kind of a Veep feeling, like this is someone who's risen up through the ranks of power, constantly hoisted by the elites, this kind of oligarchy that keeps picking her off the pile of failed candidates and putting her back up there and trying to give her another chance. And this is sort of the ultimate test when we'll see whether or not this, political amateur at the time when she first ran for president is ready for the national stage and the presidency, or whether or not she can even win. That'll be very interesting.
Yeah, it's almost like the childhood game I used to play, King of the Hill. Stuff like she keeps falling off and someone else keeps trying to reinstall her. Versus, getting there for being the strongest or the best or the fastest. Well, Charlie, I appreciate you coming on and going through this information. I'm going to put a link to the book as well as your Twitter and your Daily Mail